Welcome to the Haven for Soul Care, the podcast where we explore the art of nurturing the mind, body, and spirit. Each week, we bring you inspiring stories, insightful conversations, and practical tips to help you create a life of balance, peace, and purpose. Whether you're seeking guidance on personal growth, wellness, or simply need a moment to reconnect, this is your safe space. I'm your host, Brianna, and I'm so glad you're here. Let's dive in and take care of the soul. Welcome to the Haven for Soul Care podcast. Today we are joined by Robert Brown, who has wrote this book that he has been so kind to allow me to begin to read: Kindness, Dignity, and Respect. And we are going to have a candid conversation with Robert. So Robert, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. I read I did begin to read your story, and I wanted you to tell the audience who you are, and I want you to tell us what um prompted you to write such a what I call very transparent but most needful book.
Thank you. It's kind of a long story, and I'll make it as relevant as possible. I, um, I taught at the University of Virginia for 40 years, and I was in the Army Reserve for 24 years. And I grew up in Norfolk, Virginia, which is a Navy town.
Mm-hmm.
I was the youngest of 6 children, and my brother was in the Navy in World War II, and
Mm.
he was in several major battles where his ship was torpedoed, and they had to go over the side of the ship, and he survived the war. Um, but all of my life, I wanted to be a soldier and a doctor. And the people who knew me said, that doesn't make any sense. You're from a Navy town, and your dad never learned to read or write. He's a good man, but he's a blue collar worker, and your mother has a fourth grade education. Nobody in your family has ever been a doctor. They've been to doctors, but you're just kind of, my brother said I was being silly.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I had this all my life. There was two things I had to do, and that was to be a doctor and a soldier. So people were very kind to me. I grew up I was born in 1931, which was where the so-called Great Depression occurred. There
Mm-hmm.
was nothing great about it. A lot of poor people, and we were right in the middle of the poor people. I was born in a welfare clinic, and we lived in the bad part of town. But I had good, decent, honest parents that worked real hard, and they wanted the best for me. I had I had become a Christian when I was 12 years old. I became more and more aware that God wanted me to be a doctor and a soldier. And I was treated very kindly by a lot of people, and especially one teacher in high school. I was not a scholar. I was what you call a jock. Matter of fact, I wanted to be a football star.
Mm.
And I played pretty well in high school, and but nobody came to my door knocking, asking me to become a football star at their college. But I worked at a summer camp where this kind teacher and her husband were part owners, and they helped me get into the University of Virginia. I came to the university in January of 1950 with a letter in my pocket. I had not been admitted. And then in 1950, UVA was an all-male school, only about 3,000 students. There's 22,000 now. And I went to see this dean, and he said, I'm going to admit you to the university, not on your grades, but on the letter of your principal. He said, I know that man, and what he says is usually true. So I worked hard at UVA. I went out for the football team. I didn't make it, but I lived in a football house. all the players lived together, so I got a free room, and they gave me a part-time job, and the dean gave me a small scholarship. So I was in college, and I made fair grades, but I was working maybe 20 hours a week in different jobs, and and I was admitted to medical school. But then I failed out of medical school at the end of the first year. Um, I was home at the time playing tennis at City Park in Norfolk, and my mother got a phone call from the dean saying, "Your son is in trouble." And she said, "Well, Bobby's a good boy, and he's not usually in trouble. I'm very concerned." And he said, "Well, you just have Bobby call me when he gets home." So I got home from tennis, and I called him, and he said, "Come up here as soon as you can." And I came back to Charlottesville, and he said, "Your grades were not good, and we're not going to let you come back." Well, I spent the next 10 years in a kind of a state of misery. Everywhere I went, whenever I was quiet, in church or anywhere else, I just felt this feeling I had to go back to medical school. And literally for about 10 years, I reapplied. And in the meantime, I've been married 71 years to
Oh,
a
wow.
wonderful woman, and we have 4 wonderful children and grandchildren, great-grandchildren. And we had gotten married between the first and second semester of medical school. She was working real hard at a bank, but I was wasting my time. I was playing touch football and all kinds of games. I was not studying, and they did the right thing. And so I became a teacher. I taught school at the Norfolk Academy, which is a very good school. I coached the first wrestling team. I was the assistant football coach, and I became principal of a boarding school called Blue Ridge School. And I moved to Atlanta, became director of a children's home in Atlanta. And I came back and I got a PhD in education, and I reapplied, and they accepted me after 10 years.
Oh, wow.
This was, I said it was going to be a long story. I didn't find out until after he had died, but the chairman of my dissertation, my mentor, had gone to the chairman of the admissions committee at the medical school and said I would stake my reputation on Brown. And so they admitted me, I think, again, on the word of someone else. And thank God this time I studied and did well. And I was 10 years older than the average student. They elected me class president. And at the 50th reunion, and I don't want to sound like I'm bragging, because I want this to be clearly the Lord's will being fulfilled. I got the Walter Reed Award, which is the most prestigious award you can get for achievement at the 50th anniversary. And they gave it to me. It's something that your classmates vote for. And they gave it to me, I think, not because I was a real scientist, but I spent the last 11 years of my career treating soldiers at an active duty military base that was called Fort Lee then in Virginia. And my wife would pack my meals for the whole week, and I'd move down to a hotel room and see these soldiers, and became very, very important. And one day I was listening to a soldier who was telling me about the most traumatic story you could ever hear, about his life was almost taken. And I felt like I was really in the battle with him at the time. And tears were flowing down my cheeks, and I had chills up and down my spine. And I didn't hear any voice or anything, but it was like God saying to me, "I have prepared you for this soldier. I have wanted you all of your life to be a doctor to soldiers, not just a doctor and a soldier, but a doctor to soldiers and to this soldier right here." Thank God. And that really, I was 74 years old then. I stayed until I was 85 at particular post. And I had some wonderful experiences. And I think God was with me there. And I wrote this book as a testimony, a Christian testimony of what God has done in my life. Not that I was worthy of any of it, but that how he used me. All I had to do was to learn to accept failure as a master teacher. It taught me more than anybody else had ever taught me. It taught me what it's really like to be on the outside of that. I went back at the end of the year I failed out of and looked in the back door of the classroom where I usually sat. Somebody else was in that seat then. And it was a horrible, horrible feeling, but I needed a decade of knowing what it's like not to be prepared to do God's will, not to be judicious, not to study like. So I decided that now I'm 93 now. Thank God I've been blessed in so many ways. And so the question that came to my mind when I came home from this work, what could I do to still try to be helpful to people? And the answer was, well, you can write. You've had a lot of experiences. Write about these experiences. And I taught this one course at UVA called Mental Health. And it was a big, what we call a gut course, an easy A. I gave some academic credit for being physically fit, for exercising. They, on their word of honor, exercise 3 days a week. And I gave them about a third of their grade for that. And I had 500 students every semester for almost 40 years. So I would say to my wife, why do you think I'm still teaching this class? I've done it for so many years. And she said, because maybe somebody out there needs to hear what you have to say. Maybe just one person. So that's the reason I write. I write that I'm not a book salesman, and I don't write for money, and I don't write for fame. And in that sense, I'm extremely successful, because out of 8 books that I've written, my royalties last month was 5 cents. And the month after before that was 6 cents. So I'm very successful. I don't want the money. I'm not getting the money. I'm not getting the fame. It's God's will. It's God's plan. It's not Bob Brown. And it's worked out beautifully, just beautifully. Now, am I a perfect person? By no means. Am I a sinner saved by grace? Amen. Now, I know I haven't given you a chance to chat with me at all, but let me just tell you one more story that will make this, tell you just how meaningful this is. It was closing time at Fort Lee. We were in a separate little building, and this captain came in just as we were closing, and he said, I've been driving around this building for an hour and a half. And he said, I didn't come in because it could ruin my career to see a psychiatrist. And so while that's not exactly true, it is not a good mark for many people. So I said, well, he said, I know it's closing time. And I said, well, don't you worry about a thing. I've got nothing more important to do than to listen to your story. You tell me your story. And he said, well, I haven't slept for 3 months. And I said, why haven't you slept? And he said, every time I close my eyes, I see a picture. I said, what's the picture? He said, I can't tell you. I said, okay, well, maybe next time you can tell me the picture. He said, no, I have to tell you right now. And so I said, well, what is it? He said, I had a good day. None of my men were injured or lost. I took a shortcut to take my vehicle back to the motor pool and leave it. And just as I was taking the shortcut, I walked past a medical aid station, and 2 soldiers came up dragging a 3rd soldier between them, saying, save our brother, save our brother. They thought he was a doctor. And he said, I knelt down and I froze for a moment because I could see the brain matter coming out of his head. So I said, what happened to the 2 guys? He said, funny you would ask that. I said, why is that funny? He said, because they wouldn't leave me. I said, what do you mean? He said, they spent the whole night with me. Their commander told them to move on. My commander told me to move on, but we didn't do it. We stayed together all night. What'd you talk about? Well, we talked about their buddy. He was from Iowa, 19 years old, didn't even have a driver's license, had a girlfriend, but no driver's license.
Hmm.
And I said, do you think you were there to save that soldier's life? He said, that's what I've been thinking. I said, I'll guarantee you, as a physician, no one could have saved his life. Could you have been there for some other reason? He said, like what? I said, you tell me. He said, for those two soldiers. I said, they'll never forget you. He slept that night for the first time in 3 months. He didn't need psychiatric care. He needed the truth of his situation.
Yes.
That's how blessed. God told me to ask about the boys, about the two fellows with him. That was not something I learned in a classroom.
Yeah. Yeah. Talking to you, is so beautiful. It's so many things that you've said that I can resonate with, and I believe that God, you telling me some of the stuff that you tell is confirmation and healing for me. Um, when you said you made a statement, you said when you left school because you failed out, and you said you went back and you looked in and you said you learned what it's like not to be prepared to do God's will.
Yes.
For 3 years, Mr. Brown, I had a church. And so for 3 years, God would give me the same message to tell the congregation. You must prepare. He kept telling me, tell them, you're in a preparation season. It's important that you prepare. There's nothing worse than to show up at the destined place that he has prepared for you and you're not prepared.
Right.
You can't prepare once you get there.
That's right.
Prepare now. And even when you told me or told us the story about the man who came in who couldn't sleep, and his mind was fixated on saving someone's life, when indeed he never saw the two lives that he actually did save.
That's right. That's right.
Um, these are beautiful moments that your book, Kindness, Dignity, and Respect. As a soul care practitioner, counselor, pastor, one one of the things that you also said was what you were led by God to tell the soldier, you did not learn that in school. What I tell a lot of my clients that the things that I'm telling you, these are things that God is telling me to tell you.
Right. That's right.
I have formal education, but when you come into session with me, this is God's doing.
Yes. Yes.
So being prepared. Your book um is full. I just had it. It was something I wanted to talk about because you talk about love in here.
Yes.
Oh, I just had it. But you talk about love. One of the themes is love. I want us to talk about some of your give us an experience of love because um spirituality and psychology and all of that, people try to separate the two. They say um most who are religious Christians, they try to say, well, you don't need psychology, and a lot of psychologists are counselors or say, well, you don't need religion.
Well, the word psych, which is the beginning of psychology and psychiatry, means
Hmm.
soul, spirit. That's where it all began. and the people
Mm-hmm.
have taken it away, tried to run it away from it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the love part, I think love love is something we do. It's not something we feel.
Mm-hmm.
One of my neighbors said, "It's love is something in motion, and it's not just a gee, you call your girlfriend and say I love you very much." Well, the question is, how faithful are you? How sincere are you? What do you do that shows love? I think love begins with kindness, dignity, and respect, and love continues as long as you have kindness, dignity, and respect. You stop that, and you stop love.
Yes.
And the thing that amazed me, and I'm not a Bible scholar. Let me divert just for a moment to say this: that my mother, well, my mother was a very strong woman, not a Christian, very strong, dominating woman. Um, my father was very passive, very quiet. He had several problems. He Instead of going to school, he went on the Elizabeth River, which is part of the Chesapeake Bay. When he was 12 years old, he was putting some acid in a battery on a boat, tugboat, and it splashed in his eye, so he was blind in one eye. He had a familial tremor. His hands were shaking all the time, and it was into his voice too. So he took the back seat. But the only without an education, the only thing that took us out of the welfare department was when World War II broke out. He went to work painting ships, and in part of that job, he was either pushed or he fell 40 feet into the hold of the ship. And my mother's youngest brother was a Church of God minister, and he was asked to come to my house to pray for my father. And while he was praying for my father, my mother was saved. She was baptized in the Holy Spirit, spoke in tongues, scared the living hell out of me because I'd never seen anything like that. And my father later became baptized in the Holy Spirit. And my mother and father led the rest of the family to follow Christ. I had always been going to a Baptist church, which was within walking distance, maybe 100 yards from where we lived. So I grew up in the Baptist church, married in the Baptist church, and my whole being was in the Baptist church and even in Charlottesville, I sang in the University Baptist Church choir and stuff like that. Um, so she became a prayer warrior for me. And when I would visit her church, she would say, the people would say, "We know you, Bobby, because your mother prays for you every time we meet." So she, on her knees, she prayed for my readmission to medical school. And I'll tell you something amazing. The day that I finished all of my training and became a specialized psychiatrist, about 10 years of training, really, um, we sent an announcement that I was going to practice in Charlottesville. It arrived in Norfolk the same day. She got the announcement, read it, and died in the hospital that day.
Mm.
Her work was done. So she died at 71, a young age for her. But she was indeed a very powerful prayer warrior. When she prayed, we got her on our knees. When I left home to go to Charlottesville for the first time, she prayed so loud I was almost embarrassed that people who were going to be driving me would drive up and hear her praying and shouting. But
Yeah.
that's what took me up to Charlottesville.
Yeah. Yeah. This is, oh gosh. Um, this is such a blessing. It's such a blessing. I have when we talk about the soul, I remember because I had worked so hard to get my degrees, and it was a number of things, obstacles that were coming in the way. And I worked really hard to get my education. And I can remember the Lord coming to me, and I said, God, this is hard. The school I went to, we they we got our undergrad there, and then I went on to get my master's elsewhere. But then the school called us back and said, "Hey, we would like for you, a group of you guys, to come back. We're going to be accredited, and we want you guys to be the first class to go through, to graduate." And so here it is. I'm already struggling going to school because I'm a single mom and dealing with all of that. And so we go back, and so we are in the last semester. We're excited. We're in the last semester of school, and I'm like, okay, God, I'm about to cross the finish line when they walk in and they say to us, "We're sorry, guys, but we're not going to be able to be accredited." And I cried
Yeah, I bet
because I
so.
knew. I knew that I didn't have it in me to go to another course because that meant it would be extra years. And so, speaking of God, and I said, God, I just don't know. I said, surely you didn't bring me this far only for this. You're the one who told me to go to school because I never in a million years wanted to be a counselor. My dream was I wanted to be a nurse. And but people have talked to me my entire life. I remember people just telling me all of their things and always having this wisdom that would come from God to share,
Mhm.
right? And so the Lord began to deal with me. He said, "I need you to deal with the souls of my people."
Mhm.
And every time, and okay, well, and every time I would try to go back to school, and I said, okay, I'm gonna just work it up and go. And he said, no. He would tell me no. He said, because how I want you to work, you can't legally do this. If it makes sense, the way that he wanted me to work. So, he said, I just need you to walk and be present with my people and love them. And I said, and so he gave me the title soul care practitioner.
Mhm. Very
And
good.
so I have the education, but I also have God. And so to be able to reach into the soul of a person to help them understand and to help them understand how that their soul that has been fragmented can be loved back to healing and wholeness
Yes.
is a
Yes.
work that is delicate. But and you're not going to be rich, like you talk about with the books. It's not going to make you a millionaire. But the reward is to see a person who was broken become whole,
Amen.
and to
That's right.
be able to have that relationship with God, to understand that if you have nothing else in the world, if you have that relationship with God, everything else is going to be all right. But so yeah, so I'm blessed to have been able to talk to you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's my pleasure and honor. Um, you know, one of the things that happened that I mentioned in the book, um, there's a competition between psychologists and psychiatrists. And a psychiatrist has to go to medical school and do all that. And a psychologist gets usually a master's or a PhD or both. I had been a licensed psychologist before I went to medical school. So I had both, but um, we had a dear Christian friend, a woman in Virginia Beach, who was the chief psychologist at a psychiatric hospital.
Hmm.
So she invited me to come and give what is called grand rounds. When a doctor goes to see a patient, it's called making rounds. And when a visiting doctor is called in to see one patient in front of the whole staff, it's called grand rounds. So this woman, her first name is Peggy, now deceased, but a very devout Christian. She she was very competitive. So they gave me the toughest patient they had to interview in front of the staff. It was a crowded room. And people were standing with their backs to the windows. There was no more seats left. The whole room was too hot. It was the summertime. And they had at the head of the table, they had a seat for me with a little glass of water, and they had a seat for the patient. From the time I walked into the room, I saw the patient was watching every move I made. And so they had told me that she had been in the hospital for 2 weeks and had not spoken a word. She was mute. And muteness is a very important symptom because it could be something like a stroke, or it could be all kinds of a brain tumor, or it could be psychological. So, and they had her on escape precautions and suicide precautions. So I was prepared for the worst. And so I spoke to her, and I've never spoken to a nicer person in the world. She was as kind and cooperative and told me things that I would have never dreamt that she would have been willing to share. And the audience was like me, dumbfounded. So at the end, I said I was prepared to deal with a challenging patient. I was told that it might be difficult to get you to talk. Can you tell me why you were so nice to me? She said, you gave me your water. That's all I did. I had totally forgotten it. Oh, I just slid the water over with my hand. What did that mean to her? Somebody cared. So she left. She did well, I understand. And the staff stayed there. So Peggy stands up and said, Bob Brown, I told my husband this morning I was going to bring you down a notch. But I should have known you had a trick up your sleeve. And I said, well, I need to come down a notch, no question about that, or two. But that was no trick. I said, I totally had forgotten that. And so she said, okay, I just give up. She said, are there any questions? So this nurse stood up and said, I've been a nurse as long as you've been a doctor, and I've never seen anything like this before. Can you tell me how it works? And I said, even a dog can tell if you like him or not. You've got to care for the person you are privileged to take care of. And a patient can tell it a mile away. And the doctor gets too busy with that computer, they don't even look at you nowadays sometimes. So the 90% of the cure is having somebody that cares about you who can open the seaway for you to walk through if necessary. That person is God, and God works through people. He doesn't come down with big thunderstorms anymore, and he does it. There's a term, I watch a Jewish broadcasting network on TV sometimes, and I've learned a whole lot. And they say that God's will is revealed today more incrementally, a little bit here and a little bit there. But you've got to be looking for God's will, and you will find it. You've got to be looking. Just like you said, you got to be prepared to receive his will and to do it.
Yes.
I just heard on television, David Jeremiah, whom I love very much. Of course, I don't know him, but he said when those lions did not eat Daniel in the lion's den, that Spurgeon, who was a famous Baptist preacher in London 100 years ago, he said they would have had indigestion if they'd eaten him, because Daniel was half grit and half backbone. We got to be half grit and half backbone ourselves, and not ashamed that the power that we have is unlimited.
Yes.
That's power.
Yes, it is. It is. The power to understand that, the power that we have to be able to change people's lives is really all the work of God just going through us. It's not that we should get the glory for ourselves, but that is just God. And like you said, to be able to be a vessel used by God really does mean that you are exhibiting the love that so many people need.
That's right. Yeah. Um, I've got a wonderful neighbor that comes over and takes my trash cans down a steep driveway because I can't do it anymore without being afraid of falling. I use a
Mm-hmm.
walker. And I had to have cataract surgery a couple of months ago, first time in my life. And they said it was mighty unusual to have cataracts at 93. But he drove me. And just before we went in, he said, "Do you mind if we have prayer?" And he prayed for me. It was a wonderful thing. Took me by the arm and walked me in there and stayed with me and came out with me. I mean, that's a real neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
We're told to love one another. And that means take out the trash cans and bring them
Yes.
in.
Yes. 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 Um, and those little things like that, you never know what that is doing for the individual.
That's right. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, because so many people hide behind a smile or
That's right.
hey,
Yeah.
and then in their go back home and they're living in a place of depression or sadness or despair.
Yeah.
But acts of kindness
That's
brings hope, brings light.
yeah. Well, Jesus, this every word that's recorded that he said is so meaningful and powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Have him repeat it. I think it's the chapter 14 of the book of John. Excuse me. And in two little sentences, only about 5 verses apart, he says, "I command you to love one another." And then he says it again. Jesus was not a person who repeated himself. So look how powerful that is. It's all about love.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all about kindness, dignity, and respect. The subtitle is Dignified and Respectful Ways to Love One Another. That's the subtitle of my book. It's
Mm-hmm.
all about, you know, if there's so much hatred and rage and anger in the world today, and it's not necessary. Um, the people who got in touch with you, they had news releases that really were better than my book, no question about that. But they had picked up on one thing that I had minimized, but I see it was very important. If we want to survive as a people, we better start loving one another. Um, I'm going to say one thing here. Um, I'm an old white man, and old and white men are not very popular nowadays. But I had the privilege of teaching many, many students, and I would say 90% of my soldiers were Black.
Mm-hmm.
Came to love them, and then for them to love me. We had an uprising here in Charlottesville several years ago,
Mm-hmm.
uh, based on race issues, and some extreme people on both sides, left and right, were
Mm-hmm.
raising hell here. And I got a phone call from Korea.
Mm-hmm.
And the soldier said, "Dr. Brown, are you all right?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, I'm watching this stuff on television in Charlottesville, and I just want to make sure you're okay." That's love.
That's love.
And and you can't see it, but I'm sitting here with a picture of one of my very best students who's angry at me right now for a different reason, but he was one of my smartest ones. Um, and he sent me a picture with himself and Martin Luther King III.
Oh,
And
wow.
Martin Luther King III has just joined the faculty at UVA.
Oh, really?
In my class, the class of 1967 at the School of Medicine at UVA, we had all white men and one woman who was Black.
Mm.
It's Vivian Penn, Pinn. She's done extremely well in her work. We now have the Penn building, medical school building. We have
Oh,
Penn scholarships. She's she's a wonderful person, and I think people should be treated just like Martin Luther King said, based on their character and
mm-hmm.
not on anything else, but just how truthful and honest and kind and decent and respectful they can be. That's all.
Yeah. 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 And I wish we could be like more like that in this world that we're living in. I
We got to
do.
stop it if you want to survive. We got to start loving.
We do. We do. And it's free. And the thing about it is free to love. It's free to be respectful. You know, all of this stuff is free. It's free to do. It
That's
costs us
right.
nothing.
That's right. And it pays off really well.
It
It's
really does.
very contagious.
It
You
really is.
treat you treat somebody nice, and they're going to be treating other people nice. You
Mm-hmm.
treat them bad, they're going to be treating others bad.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. They will. They will. And we can see that. Um, I want to tell you thank you. I appreciate you. I appreciate your the work that you have done. Um, you know, I pray that those who are listening to us will take this and they will apply love in every area of their life.
Yeah. Well, I would say start off by being kind to somebody.
Mm-hmm.
You can't love them any better than that as the first step. And
Mm-hmm.
once you are kind to somebody, they're never going to forget that. Never.
Yeah. Yeah. And you may be the only person that they receive kindness from.
That's right. That's right.
And so, where can we get your book from?
Well, Amazon is it costs 19.95, but if you have it also is in that ebook form, which is
Mm-hmm.
almost nothing. And if you have Kindle, it's free, totally free. Um, so you look under Robert S. Brown. Um, I happen to have an MD and a PhD, and it's called Kindness, Dignity, and Respect. Um, while you're looking, you can look at my webpage, which is kindwordswork.com.
Okay.
But maybe sorry, meaningfulwordswork.com. It's all about the way we talk to each other that makes all the difference in the world. Yeah.
Mm, that is good. That is, before we end, can
Mhm.
you go in more detail with what you just said? It's the way that we talk to each other that matters, that counts.
Yes. You know, I think of a good example of this. Um, I remember one time, two very interesting things happened in this particular church. We were going to a very small Episcopal church. And when you go forward for communion service, they don't bring it to your seats like I'm used to in the Baptist church. Everybody lines up and goes forward. And we were in line, and the man held us back. And I found myself getting irritated, and I said to him in a very unkind way, what's going on here? And he said, well, I wanted you to be with your family.
Mm.
So he was as kind as he could be to my irritation. The quickest way to put out a fire is with kind words. The anger and the fire in a person's voice can be quenched right away with kind words. So look for opportunities. People are frustrated in grocery stores or parking lots or there's no problem about it. If you can say something kindly to them, um, it'll make a big difference to them. It can change their whole mood in a matter of seconds.
Yes, it can. Yes, it can. That is one. That is wonderful. I was going to my car. That reminded me. I was shopping. I was at a Walmart, and I was going to my car, putting my groceries up, and I was a little irritated myself because I was like, "Oh, so many people out here," and so I'm going to my car, and I hear this little voice that comes up behind me, and they're saying, excuse me," and I turn around and I see this little girl. She's Hispanic, and she's out there with her family, and she hands me this piece of paper, and she says, "I want to invite you to our church." Changed my whole day around because
Oh,
she was so cute and so sweet.
nice. Isn't that something? Yes, indeed. That's the
Yes,
way it ought to be.
yes. You know, And you could tell she was just out there doing what she was told, just handing out invitations. And I just was like, Lord, thank you. I mean, it just
Right.
changed my whole day.
Yes, indeed, it does that. One of the things that I've told my soldiers, and especially the Black soldiers, was that we're indebted to Black women for keeping Christian spirituality alive.
Mm.
And they would say, well, you don't know my grandmother, you don't know my mother.
Uh-huh.
But the truth is, I think we do, not only the singing and praying, but I think they've been the most consistently dedicated people to Christ.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Haven for Soul Care. We hope today's conversation has provided you with the encouragement and tools to take care of yourself and embrace the journey ahead. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, rating, and sharing it with others who may benefit. Remember, you're not alone on this journey. Take a moment today to nurture your soul. Until next time, take care of yourself and each other.